Hello, I'm Christy, and I am presenting on Joan of Arc, the Maiden of Orleans. Um, Joan of Arc was born around 1412. She was born Jeanne d'Arc and died at the age of 19 in 1431, so died very young. She was the daughter of a tenant farmer, Jacques d'Arc, from the village of Dormy in northeastern France. Joan of Arc was illiterate throughout her life. She was never taught to read or write. Under the influence of a very pious mother, she was raised to love the Catholic Church and to participate in its liturgies, and had a great, great affection for the Catholic Church. Her father, at the age of 16, tried to make her a match for marriage, and Joan of Arc was not wanting to get married and went to a local court to petition that she would not have to marry the person that her husband had, or her father had picked out as her husband. She was successful in that petition, and the courts ruled that she indeed did not have to marry. Kind of the background of what was going on in Joan's world as she was growing up. There was the 100 Years' War. It was from 1337 to 1453. It was a very long war between England and France. England was winning. It started over a bitter disagreement over succession to the French throne. The French really should have won the 100 Years' War pretty handily. They had a bigger army, were better equipped, but they were not winning. So Joan would have witnessed raids of her hometown by the English as a child. She witnessed her village at one point being burned to the ground. The English were considered to be illegitimate invaders and occupiers of her land and the place where she lived. Joan's beginning of her military career started when we could say 13. She had begun to hear voices, which she attributed the voices to a number of saints. And these voices were telling her that she was to save France by expelling its enemies. She was 16 years old when she finally petitioned to go solve the siege at Orleans. The siege had been quite long. It didn't look like there was going to be any headway made with it. Joan said, "I must be at the king's side. There will be no help for the kingdom if not from me. Although I would rather have remained spinning wool at my mother's side, yet must I go and must I do this thing, for my Lord wills that I do so." God willed her to go deliver the French from the English at Orleans. She was initially rebuffed. After that rebuffal, when she was rebuffed, there was a prediction. She made a prediction of a reversal of the Battle of Rouvray. She attributed the prediction to grace divine in a vision while she was tending her flocks at Lorraine. Her prediction of this battle and it being a turnaround point was told days before the messengers from the battlefront actually came and gave the same message, which added legitimacy to her claims to be divinely guided and inspired to go participate in this war. She also, because of this, was beginning to gather a following who believed that she fulfilled a local prophecy of a virgin that would also be a deliverer. She was given a blessing to move on to the crown prince in Chinon. So, an important point, she cut her hair short, dressed in men's clothes, posing as a page boy as a precaution, and went through the battlefront and made the 11-day journey to Chinon. Joan promised Charles that he would be crowned at Reims. He had given her a private audience, and he was so moved and impressed by her that he did approve an army against all of the advice of all of his advisors for her to attempt to relieve the siege at Orleans. She was 17 when she was made the head of the French army and was equipped with donated armor, weapons, a sword, a horse, and a banner. and it's said that she was equipped with white armor and white horses and white banner, probably in recognition of her virginity. After years, it is said by Stephen Ritchie, a historian, after years of one humiliating defeat after another, both the military and civil leadership of France were demoralized and discredited. When the Dauphin Charles granted Joan's urgent request to be equipped for war and placed at the head of his army, his decision must have been based in large part on the knowledge that every orthodox, every rational option had been tried and had failed. Only a regime in the final straits of desperation would pay any heed to an illiterate farm girl who claimed the voice of God was instructing her to take charge of her country's army and lead it to victory. Here's a picture of Joan rallying her troops at Orleans. Notice her armor is white and her banner in front of her and her horse. All of those were donated to her in the hopes that she would be the one that could fix the problem at Orleans. There was resolution at the Siege of Orleans. Joan of Arc turned the Anglo-French War into a religious war. It really had not been previously. Her life, background, and character had been thoroughly examined, frontwards and backwards, inside and out. It was determined that she was of unreproachable character. It had been feared that if she was found lacking, Charles would be accused of gaining the crown by way of the devil. Charles was told by the Dauphin that to abandon Joan would be an offense against the Holy Spirit. She led a charge into Orleans, suffered a serious injury of an arrow between her neck and shoulder, but returned to lead an assault that took the fortress Les Tours. The English retreated the next day, and the siege was over. Joan continued on to Paris, capturing towns and villages, with little and even no opposition from the English. She just snatched them up one by one. Her reputation very much preceded her. All good things come to an end. Joan was captured. The French had revered her and she had garnered the support of Archbishop of Embrun and different theologians. The English believed she was possessed by the devil. I mean, after all, she's a peasant girl. She defeated the great English army, one of the greatest armies of Western Europe. It wasn't simple propaganda either. They really did believe or disbelieved that God could support the French through Joan. That very idea was just not something they could wrap their heads around. She was eventually captured at Compiègne. She was locked in a tower, and from this tower she attempted escape by jumping 70 feet into a moat. The English locked her up in another tower in ruin. That tower is now named after her, and on many repeated attempts, the French tried to help her escape. King Charles, threatened vengeance on the English and English women for their maltreatment of Joan, and she most assuredly was maltreated. Joan was soon set for trial. Her trial was very politically motivated and was run entirely by English clerics. Joan requested that French clerics also be included at her trial. She was flatly denied that request. The tribunal, this was interesting, attempted to set a theological trap for her to commit heresy. At that time, it was believed that no one could be 100% assured that they were under grace. So she was asked, "Are you under grace?" And she replied quite profoundly, "If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God so keep me." This dumbfounded her accusers, considering that she was illiterate and uneducated, that she did not fall for that theological trap. She was kept in a secular prison. This would have been against medieval trial law. And she was guarded by men instead of nuns, also something that should not have been done. The tribunal tricked her, finally, into signing a fake confession and altered much of her permanent trial record. In addition, since they couldn't make heresy charges stick because of her own brilliant self-defense, they brought up multiple charges of cross-dressing, which was a capital offense, especially when she were to do it multiple times. But it gets interesting. The medieval church law required that charges of cross-dressing be considered inside a context. St. Thomas Aquinas in Summa Theologica outlines several instances in which cross-dressing is acceptable and actually should be understood as protective. So, when Joan of Arc in the very beginning dressed as a page boy for safe passage through enemy territory, that would have been legal. When she dressed as a man in battle and while encamped with her troops, this was also legal. It was not only for the protection of her body while in battle from being injured, but also from being molested or raped while encamped with her soldiers. So also legal to dress as a man while she was in battle or encamped. She was dressed in men's clothing in prison, again, to prevent being raped and molested. Also, she should have been guarded by nuns, not by men. Kind of keep going back to that point. And then further showing about these charges of cross-dressing. Whenever she did not need the protection of men's clothing, she always wore a dress. It was not that she was cross-dressing to be cross-dressing out of any what they would have considered deviance at that time. She was actually found guilty on multiple counts of cross-dressing. They did not consider that inside of context, and she was sentenced to die in 1431. The execution was quite gruesome. May 30th, 1431, she was tied to a tall pillar at Vaumarche in Rouen. She asked for a crucifix to be displayed in front of her. She also put a small wooden cross in the front of her dress. After she died, the English raked back the coals to expose her charred body so that no one could claim that she had escaped alive. At the time, there was a habit of collecting relics of saints. Relics would have been venerated in different churches throughout the medieval church. So they burned her body twice more to prevent any collection of relics. Her remains were thrown into the Seine River. Her executioner later stated that he greatly feared to be damned. She was given a retrial after her execution posthumously at the order of Pope Calixtus III. The re-examination of her trial was done in 1452. A formal appeal was filed in 1455. Then on July 7th, 1456, it was determined that she was innocent. She was declared a martyr, and her accuser was considered to have committed heresy in falsely charging her. The technical reason for her execution was a violation of biblical clothing law. It was determined that doctrinal exceptions to that clothing law had failed to be taken under consideration. Joan of Arc was beatified in 1920, 489 years after her execution. In summary, Joan was convinced that God himself gave her a mission to reclaim France in the name of the Catholic Church, changing this from a merely political skirmish over crown legitimacy to something that God willed to have happen for France. She grew up watching English occupation and the terrorizing of her village. Joan, if we're going to be quite frank, was chosen out of desperation, not any specific military qualification. She had not had any proven experience. She was single-minded in her mission, which fired up devotion and passion for her campaigns, especially with the soldiers around her. It was very much, she was lit on fire for God, and that this was God's mission. It was bigger than Joan of Arc. Her military success reinforced this belief that she was sent by God. King Charles believed that God had fulfilled a prophecy through her. She remained faithful to the Catholic Church, even to the point of martyrdom. Here is my bibliography. There are some websites there where there's also some really interesting videos. If you care to learn more, that would be a good resource, a good place to start. All right. Thank you very much.